Okay. Whew. All right, last week, let's see if I can recall all that we covered last week. For those of you who were not here, um, we did a little unique way of handling our 3 chapters rather than doing an outline, which is what we're back to again this week. Last week we went through and we did 3 analytical lists, and for those of you who didn't get a chance to see that, I hope you'll go and take a look. Analytical lists are such a great way of assimilating and kind of drawing together conclusions about all the things that we've been learning and drawing real practical observations out of it, things that you don't necessarily see if you're looking for just the pragmatic flow of thought. What is the progression of events? These are the people, these are the places, this is what's going on. Rather than looking at it from that perspective, last week what we did is we looked at God Almighty at work in the lives of these boys at that time. And what we know is, where had the boys come from? Where had the boys been in their relationship with Joseph, and even in their own personal behaviors, things that you recall about what we've learned about anger and jealousy is a huge part of this. And the reason it's such a huge part is because what was the outcome of their anger and jealousy toward their brother Joseph? They sold him into slavery, which, by the way, once the reunion occurs, which we're going to look at here in just a few minutes in 45, although the boys did it out of their anger and jealousy, what was the work of God in all that?
To have him in that place.
Yep. Sovereignly, one of the titles that we looked at last week was that he is called God Almighty. And in that title is that subject matter of his sovereignty over the affairs of men, right? And the affairs of his own word. He has spoken certain promises. He has profoundly set into place a plan of salvation for man through a seed that started all the way back in Genesis 3 with the garden, when man fell. And now what we're seeing then is God Almighty just doing, quite honestly, miraculous things, but doing them not in spectacular ways necessarily on the surface. Not like parting of the Red Sea, which we'll get to in Exodus if we ever do that, right? But here what we see him doing, it is miraculous work in the lives of people. So what was the other thing that we saw when we looked at the almighty work of God in these boys? What kind of changes have we seen?
Their hearts were changed. They recognized their guilt.
Big. What a big transformation. Now, we had a really great sermon from our pastor here at Woodlawn Baptist Church yesterday. And the pastor was preaching on the subject of forgiveness and bitterness, right? What do you think? What do you think about the process that you watched with these boys? How miraculous was this, actually? How hard is it to get to that place where do you remember what Reuben was saying to the boys when they were in the presence of their brother? They didn't know it was their brother yet. I told you guys not to do that, right? I told you this was going to result in all these problems. So the blame game sort of going on there. And although Reuben righteously had the right to say, I told you so, which I am so guilty. I do that all the time. I'm not good at just holding my tongue. I told you not to do that. Why didn't you listen to me? I'm always right. You know I'm always right. Yeah, no, that's not the way to go about it. But Reuben did do that. And in the storyline there, though, with Reuben having said that in front of his brother Joseph, at the time when he thought Joseph was yet an Egyptian king or prince, and he didn't know that he understood him, how valuable was that statement in that flow of thought there? The relationship between Joseph and them.
Well, in their heart, that when he overheard that.
Yeah. Hey, literally, what did Joseph have to do?
Separate himself and go out and weep.
Yes, he left the room to cry. because it so profoundly struck him that Reuben, at least at this point, was one among the brothers who had a sense of remorse, and he made this statement. So now he had one little piece of information that he had not had for these 20 years previously. But what had Joseph done in his heart? What is the work of God Almighty in Joseph's heart all these years? How easy is it to forgive somebody selling you into bondage like that? He had not, apparently, even if he had a grudge in the beginning, possibly, I would certainly think he'd be very upset. At 17 especially, I mean, he was very young.
He had a lot of practice at forgiving.
Oh yeah, that's true, that's true.
He could have held a grudge against the baker also.
Yes. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yes, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah.
And who wouldn't?
And Potiphar's wife for falsely accusing him. I mean, wow, yeah. So Joseph's life also, God Almighty, has been at work in his life, in behind the scenes, in their hearts, through the work of situations, bad situations. When we move forward in our story today, as we see Jacob introduced to Pharaoh, what is Jacob's view of his own life as well?
Well, in all this, that phrase that we hear so often, man meant it for evil, God meant it for good.
Mm-hmm.
So Joseph recognized he was there to save his people.
That's exactly right. So that was Joseph. And then Jacob, how did Jacob think about his own life in all of these years as well? Go to chapter 47 and verse 9. What did Joseph report to Pharaoh when he was introduced to him? Yes, few and unpleasant. Okay, few and unpleasant.
30 few years.
Yeah, 130 few years, and those are, but at least in comparison to his fathers before him, it was few. And he does go on to live how many more years? Another 17 years. So that's quite a good long life. 147, I think it was at the end. But there were some pleasant ones in there. So what had Joseph seen that was pleasant? That God Almighty, let's do that switch and let's move to the pleasantries. What has God done for Jacob at this point? I mean, did you make a list on how God had worked in his life? I have it somewhere. I know it in my head. It's okay.
In charge over all Egypt and all Pharaoh's.
That's Joseph, but Jacob. Remember when the boys came back and, hey, Dad, Joseph's alive, right? And he's going stunned, right? He's stunned. But then what does it say that he was after that? First he was stunned, and then what? In verse 27 of 45. His spirit was revived. And I don't know if you did a word study on that. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But that is a picture of the work of God in the heart of Joseph through all these years. Although later he does say to the king, my years have been short in comparison to my other family members. And they've been, what did he say? Unpleasant, yes. So there's been struggles, there's been heartache, there's been sorrow, right? But yet, he says back in 45, God says about him that when he was given the news about Joseph being alive, that he was revived. But what else might have revived him in that moment? What else did he bring back with him besides the news that Joseph was alive? Brought Benjamin back. And who else? Don't forget him. He had been left behind in prison. Simeon. So he had got Simeon restored to him. He had Benjamin restored also, whom he was quite fearful when he sent him. And do you remember what his statement was about Benjamin when he finally relinquished him to God? If he dies, he dies basically, and if he's restored to me, then he's restored. But either way, in the end, what was the necessity? Food. God, and for whose welfare had Jacob finally come around to looking out for?
Nation.
The whole nation, all 12 of the sons and their posterity after them. So he had also grown again. So that was just one thing. And those are not things we talked about last week. But we are seeing the work of Almighty God in the lives of all these people. And we're getting a glimpse at the fact, I think, that our lives are exactly the same in so many ways. Each one of us individuals, we talk about every week the struggles that we have, sicknesses, marriages, finances, just they're innumerable for every one of us, right? And yet what we see in the stead of it, in the sovereign, I kind of think of it as that tamarisk tree that Abraham planted there at Beersheba. You know, it's that one steady, firm, standing reminder that God is ever present, that God is in control, and that God is watching over his word to perform it, right? Okay, so that was one thing. We also looked at the testing to see the results of it. That was last week. And then the last one was the observance then of spiritual growth, which we touched on slightly here when we looked at how God had worked in their hearts to change their hearts, to turn their hearts, right? And in the end, what did we end up? We had started with what? With our group of 12 boys, the 12 of them. We started out with what kind of boys, what kind of men? Even Joseph.
Wayward and willful.
Yeah, and worldly, and caught up in the emotions of family and I would call it family rivalry, so to speak, right? And also taking the eye off the ball, because this is a family unit, remember, that had an understanding that they were to be covenant bearers, right, for this promised seed that was moving forward, and that, as a matter of fact, to the point and to the degree that Jacob deceived his own father to receive it. He desperately wanted to be that one who would be the carrier forward, who would be the lead, the head, the lineage through whom God's seed would come. And so we saw that with Jacob, and yet then all these boys are bickering and fighting, and who's going to be the one? And what we came to see was God systematically removed 3 of the boys in their sequential order. We know that Reuben was removed. We know that Simeon and Levi were removed. And then ultimately we've got Judah. But Judah, was he a peach of a guy? No. What a mess, right? So what do you learn about the spiritual growth of people then? Because in the end, we know Judah does get used, although he was not a gem, right, to start with. He was definitely a diamond in the rough, as they say. What did you see? What do you see about that? What do we learn about spiritual growth from what we've looked at so far?
One of the things that I saw, which maybe because of circumstances right now too, is they were all about self. And once they began to actually look at someone else, because when Judah started looking, it's like, no, take me instead.
Yeah.
It's like he was for someone, and same with Jacob. When he started thinking for the nation, not just self.
Things begin to turn. Isn't that true? How hard is that for us to get to that place, though? Sometimes it takes years of stubborn, willful defiance against what we know is right. You know, that passage or that scripture in James, I think, is where it is, where it says the one who knows the right thing to do and he does it not, to him it is sin. You know, we walk in sin through willfulness of duty to do what's right, knowing what's right, right? And as our pastor said yesterday, we justify it. It's all about justifying ourselves. Well, but they did this and they did that, right? And so, wow, the work of God. And when God does it, then what happens? There you go. It lifts your heart. It really does what it says here. It revived him. What God did for Jacob by bringing and restoring what he thought was a dead son back to his fold of his family, and to restore the 12, as a matter of fact, whom we know become the nation, right? So when he got the fullness of his family restored to him, plus 2 through grandsons, right? Manasseh and Ephraim. The healing, when we look at that word study, I think you're gonna be fully appreciate how God works in hearts to go beyond the superficial of just fixing the problem. But what he does for the heart is a healing thing. It's a transformation and a renewing of the mind with such forceful power that it really does change nations. It changes the trajectory of our lives. Okay, so that's kind of the review of where we came from and what we did last week. So this week, yes, Carol.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Has anybody figured out, in 45, 6, famine had been in the land for 2 years. How long did this going back and forth between the boys? I wonder how long that took.
Well, okay, remember that Joseph was 30 when he stood before Pharaoh. So that had been 13 years. Then there were 7 years of plenty. So add 7 to 13 and you get 21, right? So 21 years now. Then here we're 2 years now into the
7 and 13 is 20.
20. Okay, so 20. And then we get 2 years of, thanks for my mathematician in the room. And then we get now 2 years into the famine, so you can add 2 years. So now we're at 22, right? So that's 22 years at least since he had been sold into his slavery.
But the actual going back and forth with these boys.
Oh, well, okay, well,
I wonder if it was half of that 2-year time, if it took a year of going back and forth.
yeah, about a year of going back. Yeah, well, it had to be because probably the first time they came down to see him and ended up having to leave Simeon, and then he went home, and it was probably a year or close to a year anyway, maybe 8, 9, 10 months. I mean, I'm just guessing. But we know it's 2 years now into the famine years.
They need to go back again.
Yeah, and they have to go back again. And it may have been a year into the famine years before, or to the famine years before they needed their first stash of food even. So it might even be one more year than that. Maybe we are at 23 years. But it's a guess.
Simeon at that point.
You can do your math on it though and figure it out pretty close. It's a kind of a thumb guess on some of this, but close. Okay. All right. So we know at this point Joseph's about 39 years old is what I have on my notes here. Okay. So he started at 30 and now he's about 39. Guess. Okay. All right, well, let's get started. Let's start there then in chapter 45. We came out of the previous chapter in 44. This was Joseph's last test to his brothers, right? Judah then had interceded on behalf of Benjamin, and this totally set the stage then for Joseph to be willing now to see that his brothers, in fact, had changed, right? So I actually put as one of the titles on my Genesis 44, the brothers are changed men. Because this is what has happened here. And it was the whole purpose for Joseph's test, the testings that he did, the 2 or 3 different things that he put them through, was to see what was their attitude at this point. How were they treating Benjamin? And were they sorry for the things that they had done? And he came to see that yes, they were. Yes, they were changed men, and to the point even where Judah intercedes on behalf of Benjamin to the point of saying, take me instead, right? So now we're in 45. Let's start with verses 1 through 3. This is the grand finale, and I love the fact that, I don't know if I loved it or hated it, but I love the fact that our homework, the way we had divided it, there were the first 2 days from last week, and then we pick up now on the last 3 days for this week's homework in lesson 3. But where we stopped was right before the grand. It was just like watching a mini series, bring you right up to the great finale, and then next week, see y'all. So what happens then 1 through 3 is the grand reveal, right? What is the response of Joseph's reveal? Yeah. Okay, so Joseph reveals himself. I don't know if this pin is going to be dark enough. Is it dark enough, you guys? No. Let me go to my purple here. So that says Joseph reveals himself, and what about his brothers? The brothers are what? Dismayed. So, did you look up dismayed? No. I think we did do this last week, though, didn't we? Okay, look at. Tell me what you got.
Tremble inwardly, be alarmed.
Okay, it means to tremble inwardly, to be alarmed, and mine also said terrified. Why might they be terrified?
Because they wanted to kill him. And
Yeah,
then
why
just
not?
decided, okay, well, we won't do that, but we'll just tell you.
Yeah. It's at this point they're like, okay, wait a minute. He's crying. So is he mad? Is he sad? Is he happy? I mean, the emotions going on in that room in that moment had to be a mixed bucket of all kinds of things. For Joseph, just great joy at being able to reveal who he finally being able to reveal it. He's been holding this back for quite a while. I mean, he knows who he is. He just knew they didn't know. And so his grand opening then of saying, here I am, it's me. How did he quiet their fears?
Because he told them, you sold me here, but God sent me here to preserve life.
Yes. So, but he called his brothers to come closer to him, right? Come close to me. They came closer, and he said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold. So in that moment, I can see why they would be terrified. But then starting in verses, let's go to the next section. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 to 15 was the next part. 1 to 3, 4 to 15. Joseph encourages them, right? So, under that title, how did he encourage them? What did he tell them that encouraged them? That put that terrified feeling that they had in that moment to rest. Yeah. It was God that did that. It was God who sent me.
Also told them not to be grieved or angry with themselves.
Yeah. Do not be grieved.
It's kind of a statement to me that means, I don't hold that against you.
Grieved and what was the other word?
Angry.
Or angry. There you go. Okay, and now, interesting too then is then he recounts to them what actually happened because of the fact that he was sent into Egypt. They definitely did mean it for evil, but God meant it for good. And in what regard does he explain that to them here in verse 8? What does he say? Oh, and by the way, this is a simple list. Again, did y'all catch it? Because we talked about the distinguishing differences last week about simple lists, topical lists, and analytical lists. So we did analytical lists together on the board. But within the text here, we have a simple list again, right?
But in verse 6, the famine's only been here 2 years, but there's 5
There's
years
5 more years
So
coming.
The brothers wouldn't have known that.
No, they did not know that. Do not be grieved or angry. God has sent me here, and there are 5 more years of famine ahead. I'm putting that in my words there, right? What verse was that?
6.
Okay. All right. Now, this is what I want to do. I'm going to do a simple list here for you because I want you to see how this works out. Because one of the things he says in there is a little bit tricky. What did he say that God had made him? A father to Pharaoh. And, do you see the conjunction, A-N-D, and Lord of all his household? And then what follows that? Another and of another conjunction. So there are 3 things that God made him, right? So let's write those down. God made me. So you would underline that, and then you would number them, 1, 2, and 3. Father to Pharaoh. Number 2, Lord of his household. And 3, ruler over all of Egypt. So, who knows what that very first one means? A father to Pharaoh. Did anybody look it up or do some work on that? Okay. This is one of those ones that I looked around through the commentaries on, and there was nothing. Nobody even addresses it. But I did solve it. And the reason I feel real confident to say that is simply look at the board's list. What does the list do? It puts the subject of father to Pharaoh in a list of what are the other 2 things. Okay, well, they are ascending in order. That's a good observation, yes. They are ascending in order, but because there's the word and in between each one of those, what does that tell you? That's a conjunction, correct? So they're distinctive, right? They are distinctive, and yet they're probably similar, right? I can remember there was one that we did about the Antichrist in, I think it was in Daniel. It was in one of the books, though, where it gave us a thing about one that it said that he didn't like women or something is what the interpretation was. But the rest of the list listed him as one who was opposing to all other gods, and it listed like 4 or 5 other things, right? So in the end, when it talked about the women and him not being favorable toward women or something like that, and people often would say, oh, then he's a homosexual, right? That that has to do with sexual things. But all the other things in that list were about what subject? False gods, other god worship. He wants to ascend. He wants to exalt himself above all things. That was what was in that list. What's in this list? All things pertaining to him having authority and having been exalted to a position of rulership. So if you know what a lord is, define what a lord is if in a position over a government. It's a high official. Okay. And just by definition, when we speak of Jesus as being Lord, what do we think of there? That he's our what? He's our Lord and, Savior, but master, right? Lordship is master, correct? So he's the boss. And ruler is more along the lines of a diplomatic position of like a king, or in his case, second to the king, correct? So if this is a ruler and this is a ruler, both of them have to do with authority and leading over a government, what is father to Pharaoh? There you go. And then what does a father do? He gives advice. So he is an advisor to Pharaoh. Now, the thing that caught my eye on this once I thought of this was, do you remember the title that was given to Joseph when he was younger in the text? It says, and he was a son of old age. And we we came to see that that was speaking about his maturity, his wisdom, right? Not that he was the child of Joseph's old age, but that he himself was a child that displayed maturity of age. For his age, he was old for his age. He was mature for his age. And in that, they were expressing he had these qualities of being the kind of son that a father would love to have because he could trust him. He was mature. He had ratted on his brothers about what they were doing badly as far as being shepherds out in the field in that particular account. But that was a good thing because as a shepherd, what's necessary for the shepherds to be doing?
Vigilance.
Yeah, vigilance, taking proper care, doing the right thing. You know, this is their income. This is their livelihood, right? And the boys weren't doing that. And so Joseph basically telling on their brothers was not necessarily a negative. I think it was actually a positive. And from the perspective of the father, he was a son of old age to him. And so in this case, he's a father to Pharaoh. Isn't that interesting? Again, wisdom, maturity, integrity, one that you could count on the counsel. It was counsel that was wise and discerning, right? And how had Joseph proven himself to be a father to Pharaoh previous to this? That was actually supernatural.
Telling him what his dreams meant.
Yeah, explaining the vision and then following it with what? A plan. How to get these people and their nation through all that was going to go on. So now, do you understand Father Pharaoh? Makes sense, doesn't it? So I just want you to I want to make sure you're really picking up on this inductive training I'm giving you here. What helps you to know a definition if it's given to you in list form like this? What can maybe not 100%, not always, but in most of the ones I've encountered, the context rules for your interpretation. And since the other 2 points of the 3 that are listed in the list have to do with rulership and authority and leading of a nation, that first one, father to Pharaoh, has to be also. And therefore, when you consider it from that way, then you start thinking, oh, well, so what is fatherly advice, being a father to a Pharaoh? What does a father do? Well, they give good advice. They give good counsel.
Looking at it now, because of all what he said, it says a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his household and ruler over all of Egypt.
Yes,
So
progressive.
And then he got to, in 9, it says, God has made me lord of all Egypt.
Of all.
And Pharaoh is part of Egypt.
Yes.
Joseph is head of this entire nation.
He is. And the only one over him is Pharaoh himself, right?
I mean, to me, except
Well, Pharaoh,
put him in the position.
yeah, but earlier Pharaoh said, you are going to be second to me, and that in the nation, everyone, basically, anywhere you go, people will bow. They will show you respect. Your word is like as if it's my own. So he did give him great authority. Obviously, he's still second to Pharaoh, but, right?
Pharaoh is like stepping back going,
Yeah, you're doing such a great job. Okay,
he might drink and enjoy myself.
there you go.
He might as well be.
Good point.
Over
What did Potiphar say about Joseph when he was over his house?
same thing.
I don't have to worry about anything except the food on my table. You have got this handled. Isn't that amazing? This is,
Add to this, he's about to become Lord over all of Israel.
yes, he is. That is exactly right. And so,
Over 2 whole nations.
yes,
The second one isn't very big yet, but
not yet, but it will be. Exactly. But the point is, the vision indicated that the starting place was his own immediate family, his brothers and his father, right? Which by the time we're done with all this, we get there.
while
Okay.
we're talking about the 2 neighboring nations, I just want to make a real quick comment. I just did some quick research to answer your question.
Uh-huh.
Today, to drive from Cairo to Jerusalem is an 8.5-hour drive. And Google claims you can hike it in 6 hours, in 6 days.
Wow.
6 days, 3 hours. And to go, so here's Cairo and here's Jerusalem, and you have to go on 2 sides of a triangle to get there today. They're
Theirs was a
Probably if you're walking across open land, there's a much shorter route.
sure.
So you're traveling with a lot of kids and stuff.
And if you fly, it's even faster.
When we think of the 40 years that they took to get there, but that's because God
What
made
a-
them spend 40 years.
Isn't that there?
It's really not that far.
No. And when you get into the Exodus story, you know why it was 40 years because of what God tells you concerning the people that came out of that environment of Egypt. Although what we're seeing here in the beginning of this is how God is going to go about trying to isolate them to a degree from influence of the Egyptians. It can't be fully done, but there still was enough of a identity of Israel being distinct from Egypt that even though when they left they took with them some really bad habits like idol worship, right? But still they had an identity that was their own, and they had only married even within their own circles apparently, at least mostly. So that's
Talking about when they were in Goshen?
yes, yes. Okay, so first we see Joseph reveals himself and the brothers are dismayed, meaning terrified. Now Joseph encourages his brothers. It was God who had sent him there. We see what the work of God was in the life of Joseph all the way through 15. He's telling them what's going to happen next. You're going to live near me. You're going to be right here in the land of Goshen. And then he says in 11, I will provide for you. So again, as what was said a moment ago with the that God had made him these things, and part of that was that he was also going to be a provider then also for his own family specifically, for you and your household in verse 11. Okay, now 16 to 20. I do want to look at that word provide real quick, though, in verse 11, where he says, I will provide for you, for there are 5 years of famine yet to come. Did anybody look up that word provide, how he's going to provide? It says it's number 3557, if you want to write it down. It means to sustain, support, provide. It means to give sustenance necessary for physical survival, which in a time when famine was sweeping the land and they had yet 5 more years ahead, and it had already been devastating to the point that they had been down to Egypt twice to ascertain food for their family. This tells you that the fact that Joseph is saying to them, I am going to provide for you, I will sustain you, this was a huge thing for this family to receive from this brother, right? There was hold on a second. See if I can find my little list. I did write it on here. Where was it? Here it is. The provisions that God gave to Israel in this time of famine and in this time of difficulties. You know, as we are progressing through this, we're watching the journey of spiritual growth and the journey of just human life and this nation becoming greater and bigger gradually, right? One of the things that a pastor gave to me just this morning as I was listening, getting ready to come in, was this contrast of how God provided even in the midst of difficulties and stresses. When Joseph says, you know, I've had this really difficult life and I've only lived 30 years, you know, woe is me. And yet look what God has done for him. And so when he says to his brothers, there's going to be 5 more years of famine ahead, but don't worry, I'm going to provide. This is what God did for Israel in that time. I'm going to give you 5 things that he mentioned, and you can look at them for yourself later. First of all, God provided for them a residence in a time of displacement. Because remember, what did they say about the sheep and why they needed to go to Goshen? There was nothing. There was no grass. There was no grazing areas even. Apparently, there was a little bit more in the Goshen area. Why would that be?
Because of the Nile.
Thank you. the Nile and the multitudes of canals or rivers that came off of that. I think there's like 5 or 6 or something. I drew a map of it, and I was really kind of surprised. I knew about the Nile, but there's like all these arms off of the Nile. Yeah, so there was so much water provision, and it made me, in my mind, go back to the Genesis account. And do you remember when we looked at the rivers and how there were so many rivers, and it named all 4, the 𝐏𝐿, the whatever they were, I can't remember, the Euphrates and the Tigris, and I can't remember what the other one was. But there was all these, we were kind of flabbergasted back in that day. Do you remember what we figured out, why God even mentioned so many rivers and spent so much time in the text on those rivers? Why did he do that? Do you remember? Oh, I'm scratching way back. Part one of Genesis. It was because it was those rivers that would provide transport and for them to fill out. What did God tell Adam and Eve to do? Multiply and do what? Fill the earth. You can't spread out if there's no water sources, right? And because there was no rain on the land in the beginning, the only water sources would have been the rivers. And so God put those 4 rivers in there, letting us know he had made provision already for them to be able to spread out. So in this case, what we have is that major Tigris River, but it's got like 6 or something arms that go off of it that are additional little rivers that spread out, which provided for Egypt in a time of famine a water source, which is another reason that they were doing so well. So God's provision for Israel was that they had a place to reside that had water source in a time of displacement and famine. And part of the famine had probably to do with no rain, right? It didn't say that, but we assume. The second provision is sustenance in a time of famine. So they were being provided food through Joseph's brilliant idea that God gave to him on how to manage and prepare for that time of famine. Also, do you remember when they came in and met with Pharaoh? After he said, first he says, well, how old are you? And kind of the niceties are there. He says, well, what is your occupation? And at the end of that, what did he invite them to do? If they were worthy men. Yeah. Basically, in other words, he offered to them who were shepherds employment in a time when there was economic peril going on. Nobody had any money, right? But now Israel's being given an opportunity for economic income in a time when no one had any money. Who else was going to hire them but Pharaoh, who had, by the way, a coffer full because of Joseph, right? The fourth one was increased possessions. So the employment.
What was 2?
2 was sustenance, food provision. So residence, sustenance, employment. The fourth one is increased possessions, because that's when it says that later it tells us, and they prospered. Remember? They were in the land and they prospered. And so there's this prosperity for Israel as a nation when everyone else, it says, was struggling to get by. They were selling their crops, their land, their own selves to, just to have food. And then the fifth one is a multiplied population in a time of languishing. The rest of the population was languishing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I wanted to be sure to get those 5 points down for you that you could ponder on that. Again, that's more of an analytical list that this pastor did. Jordan something. I'll get his name for you and put it on my text when it goes out with the email. But these 5 things that he brought up this morning, I went, oh, that's like really good, because it shows that you and I can be in the most dire of situations in our lives, with health, with kids, with money, with whatever, right? Marriage problems. And yet, in the middle of that, God is providing and providing and providing and providing. And sometimes you don't notice because you're hurting so badly. You're so tied up in the emotions of what's going on in your life. You forget to stop and pause and look around and say, Lord, thank you. the whole world around me, I liked what you had said earlier, Don, about how we get so introverted in our own personal lives that we don't stop to look around. The world around us is often in greater demise than we are even. As Christians, what do we have as a resource? While the world is falling apart, our government is going crazy, the immorality of our world is just beyond. We are in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah as far as I am concerned. We have reached that pinnacle, and who knows how much worse it will get. But I look at the world around me, and I look at people who are hurting with death and disease and heartache. What do I have, though? What has God provided for me?
The rock.
Thank you. The rock himself, God Almighty, is in my heart and in my life and in my thinking. And I have a provision for me that the world who does not know the Lord does not have. So who's going to be the survivor? Not, and I'm not speaking on the level of eternal life. I mean, there's that, which is like huge. But in the day-to-day grind of living this life, walking with God, I'm walking with God. They don't have that. I have the light of life in my thinking, body, soul, and spirit, right? Enlightened by the Holy Spirit, who has now given me the mind of Christ because of relationship with him. What does the world have? They don't, right? Hopelessness. It's no wonder they're going crazy, right? We need to get these people saved.
Yeah, no foundation.
No foundation, nothing to give them hope, nothing to give their hearts peace, right? All right. So, don't you feel better about yourself now? All you have to do is have perspective, correct? Proper perspective. Okay. All right, so Joseph has encouraged his brothers. Now let's do 16 to 20 then. What is the provision that's made for them here? What does Pharaoh do for them? Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I realize did Pharaoh owe a great debt to Joseph? But did he have to extend that thankfulness to his family? Not at all.
They're being cared for better than his own people.
In many ways they are, because in the end, his own people end up in servitude to him. But does Israel end up in servitude to Pharaoh? No. Pharaoh gave them land, while the people of the land are selling their land to Pharaoh, right? Well, another provision. It's not even on the list. Add it in. Yeah? So Pharaoh invites them.
Pharaoh says, do not concern yourself with your good. Like, just go get your people. I'll replace everything you own.
Yeah.
I'll give you all you need. Just go get your people and come here.
Yes. So he invites them to come and to dwell in Egypt.
I also love that.
So he's taking on a hardship in a time when his own nation is really suffering. The whole world in that region is suffering.
But I love that Pharaoh's servants were excited.
I know. I did notice that.
It says so much about Joseph.
Yes.
They weren't jealous of him. They loved him. They loved his family. Love knowing that his family was coming.
Amazing. Yeah, he provides wagons, and then he also assures them that Egypt, the very best of Egypt, is there for them. Joseph then, okay, so we've got that. Then 21 to 23, what does Joseph do? Okay, I want to point out to you, did you see in verse 16 to 20 a key repeated word? We can even back it up. To go back to 15. Look at 4 to 15. What is your key repeated word there? What is the major subject in those verses? Who does Joseph give credit to for all that's going on? God. God, 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 God. Okay, so God is your key word in those verses. So whatever your title would be for those those few verses in 4 to 15, it should have God in it, okay? I'm just giving you another instruction here on inductive work. 16 to 20, did you notice a key repeated word besides the subjects of brother and father and Pharaoh, the people? What was his instruction? Pharaoh's instruction to the brothers and
Do not quarrel on your journey.
well, there's instruction, don't quarrel. But what had Pharaoh told them to do, and what was he happy about? In verse 16, the news came to Pharaoh's house that Joseph's brothers had what? Had come. And it pleased Pharaoh and his servants. And then in verse 18, and take your father and your households and come to me, and I will give you the best of the land. And in 19, from the land of Egypt for your little ones and your wives, and bring your father and come. Okay, I don't know if you noticed that, but the word come, 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 he's inviting them. That's why I titled it invite. But your key word here is come. Your key word up here is God. Okay, so now let's do 21 to 23, and we're going to do the same thing. So what's going on in 21 to 23?
Joseph gives them provisions for their journey.
So your key repeated word in there? Gave, 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 gave. 4 times in those few tiny little verses. So Joseph gave gifts. Did anybody do any research on that? Why would he give gifts like clothing and stuff? He gave gifts to everyone that was there with him presently, the brothers, and then he also sent the best of Egypt to his father, right? Yeah. He sent it to Jacob. I'll just read my little blurb I got out of my commentary, critical and explanatory on the whole Bible. It says, it was customary for great men to bestow on friends dresses of distinction. In other words, clothing. Because clothing was a commodity in those days. Do you remember we see even in the New Testament how often, bring my cloak, whatever. And if you have a shirt, give him another also, or give him your jacket also. Okay, the great number given to Benjamin expressed what? Remember, he gave the brothers all clothing, but to Benjamin he gave what? 5 times more or something along that line, right?
5 changes of garment.
5 changes of garment. They each got 1, he got 5. Do you remember when they were eating the meal? And he gave them portions for the table, but to Benjamin he gave him 5 times more. Okay, so it might be an exaggeration, but the point is what? He favored him. And why did Joseph feel okay about giving that favoritism at this point in the storyline? I mean, he gave the favoritism at the meal. Why? What was he doing to his brothers at that point? Testing them, right? He wanted to see how would they respond to favoritism given to little Benjamin. They had not liked it when he got favoritism before. But what was the brothers' response? They were happy and got drunk. They were just totally fine with it, it said. Okay, now he's showing favoritism again. Why might that be? Although it does not tell us in the text at all. But what do you think has happened?
He knows his brothers will be okay with it.
Yeah,
He's seen
their
the
brothers
change
are
now.
going to be fun. What an amazing story this is. Now, I'm not sure I still approve of the fact that there's favoritism going on. I really don't think that's very nice. If you give...
Especially from his position. It's like, why would you do this to somebody else?
I know.
The whole story started with
Favoritism.
favoritism and clothing.
I know.
So the gift of the
I know.
Well, he's the baby.
Yes.
Yeah, he really is.
It's his full brother.
He's
It's
the
right.
last of the sons.
But in a way, maybe, although it does not say it, but maybe it was kind of the crown on the testings, you know. Okay, let's see if you're really okay with all this. Now that everybody knows that I'm your brother.
Because he tells them, do not quarrel on the journey.
Oh, he does. He does say that. What do you think that quarreling was about? Don't quarrel on the journey. Don't quarrel about what?
About Benjamin getting 5 changes.
Maybe, but probably not. What do you think the quarrel was about? Don't quarrel. I'm alive. Go get my dad. Tell him I'm alive and bring him back. What had they done to get him where he was? What did Reuben say right away in the privacy he thought of a conversation? I told you guys, don't do that, right? So what do you think? What do you think is going to happen once these boys? I mean, they're overwhelmed in the moment of the greeting with Joseph, finding out that he's alive. But once they're in the privacy alone on the journey back, which is a couple of days or so, or whatever. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? But instead of "Are we there yet?" It's going to be more like, well, what did I say? Here it is. Joseph had observed them to be content about it back in chapter 42:22. But to one they would say, it was you that betrayed him or berated him about his dreams. You did that, right? You started this. To another, you stripped him of his fine coat. It was you that threw him in the pit. Well, yeah, but you decided to sell him, right?
Well, you decided to kill him.
Yeah, you wanted to kill him. At least I was going to sell him. I mean, so I think that was kind of the warning, is don't be bickering about that because God sent me here. It was God's doing that I came here.
Or even to, how are we going to explain this to Dad?
Right. Well, and I do think that was another part of it. It did go on in that article. I didn't put it in here, but I remember it talked about the fact that he would not want them to arrive at Dad's to pick Dad up while there's still this bickering going on and blaming. And Dad's now going to get a lot more of the story than he wants, right? Rather than just the fact that he's alive, he's going to hear the boys bickering about whose fault it was that he ended up there. I'll bet they had a few of those conversations with Dad, however. At some point, Dad would be going, "Now wait a minute, guys. What really happened here, right?" Maybe. I mean, it doesn't tell us. Yeah. Okay, so the great number of gifts given to Benjamin expressed his special attachment to his brother, and because of the change in his brother's temperaments, he felt safe in doing so. That's what they said. So here, the key word is gave. And if you didn't pick up on that, I'm just showing you these things so that you would see how you might want to title your passages. Okay, let's do 24 to 28 now. We're done with this one. Now he goes back to Dad, and what is reported? Joseph is alive and ruler. Okay. And the outcome of this, what was the result for Jacob? Yeah. Okay, first he's stunned, and then, so I'll just put on here, stunned, then relieved. Or revived, I guess is what it actually said. And when they speak about him being revived, because what did we know about how he had acted when he heard the news initially? What had happened for him literally for all those 20 years for the most part? He had just been in deep sorrow. And he also began to pour all his affections upon Benjamin then, right? So the boys really didn't solve their problem anyway, did they? Because Dad just moved his affections from Joseph over to Benjamin. Revived means this. So this is a cool key word. Revived, it's number 2421. It means restored to life, healed from a wounded condition. Cool. Healed from a wounded condition. So he had 12 sons restored to him, and he had 2 grandsons added. What a huge change in his life at this point. Okay, now let's move over here. Let's do 46. Oh yeah, here's my picture. I'll show you what I did on that. Here's where I saw all those rivers. I'll pull it up here. Hopefully they can see it on the camera. Michael's not here at the moment, so he can't help me out. But all right, so what we have is this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7 little arms off on that map that I pulled this from. That's a lot of water source, and that's why in the land of Goshen there was green grass for the animals and such, which I thought was really helpful when I noticed that, because at first when he was giving those positives on how God had blessed in spite of all the distresses that were going on for everyone else, I was thinking, how did he provide in the land of Goshen, and how is that better than being back in Canaan if famine was over the whole land? Well, at least within Goshen, they had all those river water sources, so then that made sense to me. Okay, 46. Oh, we should title it. Right, right. And I don't know why he chose to do that, but he said, I'm going to give you the best of the land. And he did. That was where all the water resources were. That land of Goshen, that is where all those arms of rivers went out from the Nile.
And also, the Egyptians held shepherds in very low esteem.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I thought about that is that that was also a good thing on Pharaoh's part, because now his people who didn't think much of shepherds didn't have to do that work anymore.
Right.
They did.
Right, exactly. Okay, so what did you title 45? On the whole, what just happened here?
Here is Joseph's family reunited.
Okay, is reunited. Or you could say revealed. I did too, but both are true. It's true. He revealed, and then they were reunited, right, with his brothers. And then what about God? Yep, God is God Almighty over all this. It was God that sent Joseph to Egypt. Okay, and he did so to do what? In verse, I think, 5. To preserve life. God sent me before you to preserve life. Right? So you could have that in your title as well. There's a whole lot of wording going on there, but somewhere in those lines. Okay? Now let's do 46. We'll start with 1 through 7. I guess I'll try this red and see if that one will work. That blue does not show up very good. That's a little better. It's brighter. Okay. Now they're about to set off on this journey for Jacob to go and be reunited with his son for the first time in all these 20 plus years, right? 22 or so years. And where does he stop first? Beersheba. So again, I have another little map that I drew on my sheet here. It's up here in the corner. And it just shows the trek of how they went from where they were in Canaan at Hebron, which is where they were living. And lo and behold, what's in the path along the journey from Hebron down into Egypt? Beersheba. So why is Beersheba an important point? What do you remember about Beersheba? Yeah. No, he didn't wrestle with God there. That was up on the other side. But he did have a dream there. The latter dream. Yeah, so we have a lot of things. So
Built a little pillar.
there you go. Jacob set up a pillar. He named that place, by the way, Bethel and El Bethel later, right? The house of God, where God called himself God Almighty. So that's in, let me give you the verses, 35:11. But in totality, it's also 35, 14, and 15. All that section right in there in chapter 35 is where Jacob has his relationship with this place at Beersheba, which he called El Bethel. Okay? 11, 14, and 15. So you might just say 11 through 15 and get it all in there. But previous to him was his father Isaac. What had Isaac done there? Pretty much the same thing. Built an altar, right? And he called upon the name there, and he called the name when he was there, Lord. That was the word Jehovah. And so that's in 26:25. And prior to that was Abraham. And what had Abraham done there? He planted the tamarisk tree. That's right. And he called God there everlasting God. That was in 21:33. So all three of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had significant contacts or what do you call it? Interactions with God in that place, which God later Jacob had said about it when he saw he had the vision there of the angels ascending and descending upon the ladder, right, that went into heaven, that he said, the Lord is in this place and I did not even know it, right? So this is Jacob prior to him coming into covenant relationship with God. So those are super important because now what's happened in 1-7? Jacob what? He has another vision. You could say at Beersheba if you would add all that in. And in that vision, what did God tell him to do? Go to Egypt. Exactly. Then there's a great list of things. I'm not going to put them on the board, but I have a whole list of things. He said, he tells him in verse 3 what? 2 things he tells him.
I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid and go down to Egypt.
There you go. Don't be afraid and go down there. And while you're there, by the way, what is he going to do for him while he's there? I'm going to make you a great nation. Look at all the great instructions he's getting in this little vision. And in verse 4, what does God say to him in that vision? I will go with you. And verse 4, and I will bring you up again. So, wow, that's clear. So he goes to this very specific place where the worship of God has been mighty for the Abrahamic covenant men. And God is now in the vision assuring him, this time you go. Because what had he told him before when there was an issue? Don't go. Stay here and I'll bless you. But if you go, right? But so he stayed. That was Isaac, I think it was, that had wanted to go. Now with Jacob, he's saying, yes, go, and I'll be with you. Now, what is this tied to then? They're going down into Egypt. What does this tie back to in Genesis 15? I promise you a land, a seed, and a nation. But know this for certain, you will be 400 years in a land not your own. And so God had already told through the Abrahamic promises that yes, they'll get the land, but not yet, not now. You're going to be sojourners on this land for a period of time. And I'm going to send you down into a land that is not your own. You will be there 400 years in that land. And so this is the beginning of what's going on with that. So
Isn't that little list of what God says in that vision, isn't the last part, number 5, Joseph will close your eyes?
yes.
Sitting, by the way, you're going to die there.
Yeah, that's another good point. Yes, absolutely. And Joseph, and in a way, there's a reassurance in that too, because he's saying to you, you're going to have your son all the way to the end. You're not going to be alone. Your whole family is going to be back together. You'll be together as a unit. And that's how you will die. You will die with your family unit around you, all of your family. Yeah. Okay? Then,
Before you go on, I was going to say real quick, I have my map open. So from Hebron, which is on the West Bank, to Beersheba, which is actually still a city today, is 75 miles.
well, really close. An hour drive in a car. But with wagons, it's probably a few hours long. That's very interesting. Okay. 8 to 27 is your next segment. Now here we have a really long rendition of all kinds of just names, right? Why do you think God gave this? And what is this all about in this 8 to 27? The genealogy. This is this. And almost a Toledot, isn't it? It could be. It doesn't say that, but it sure looks like it. It's the sons of Israel who did what? Yep. Who went to Egypt. And so he gives this genealogy. And what did it tell us about how many went in verse 26? 66 persons in all went, right? That's your operative word. That's how many went. When Joseph went and got them, that's how many came. But later it recounts and does what you just said, right, Carol? That the number who actually were down there in totality, who belonged to the lineage of him, was how many? 70. 70 is the number in all. And so now but you have to break this down. In other words, there were 66, but you got to add to that 66. 66 plus how many? You have to add Joseph, and you have to add his 2 sons, who would be considered the lineage bearers, right? Two sons. And we're not even looking at that. And then Jacob himself. So that is 1 right here, 2 right here, 1 more right here. 66 plus 4 is 70. Okay?
I have a question too.
Okay.
I was doing all this, putting all these people somewhere, I've got a list, and the number, it said, the number of Jacob kids, it said there were 33.
Okay.
List them all down, I count 34.
Oh. Probably you added Dinah in there. Would be my guess.
Well, in another one, they added a sister, and it worked, it was right.
Yeah.
Maybe it was.
Okay, because it has to do with what I just did here. Who's being added in and who is not? Dinah would not be counted among that. You're talking about the lineage of the male bloodline carriers. That's what the whole point to the lineage is. And so you would add in Joseph, you would add in the 2 grandsons, and you would add in Jacob. You're going to have to take Dinah out, and it could be at one point, like up here, this is how many went. That's went from Canaan down to Egypt. But remember, the 2 sons and Joseph were already there, so there's your 3, and then Jacob had not been added into that number. So you see how they're doing this numbering thing? It's all about perspective. That's really what it comes down to. It's all about the perspective. Who are you adding in and who are you not? And what do you have to add and what do you have to subtract? And if you're looking at it from the perspective of who is the lineage bearers, it's the men only. That's why the women aren't counted. Dinah wouldn't be counted. At some point, either Joseph is added in or he's not. But here's what we know. The number is correct. 66 went down. 70 in total were his lineage. Now,
Zilpah
All I know is these numbers right here are how we get we needed to be in this record right here. Okay? And we also see there's another one too that's a conflict, and that's in the book of Acts where it's 75. Well, in that one it says in Acts 7:14, the number is stated to be 75. But that's because the estimate includes 5 sons of Ephraim and Manasseh. So then that gets to 75. So there's always there's always issues. This is when we do the kind of mathematics you're talking about doing, Carol, it gets really complicated. In what year did a guy begin his reign? Was that his pre-reign or his post-reign? Was he reigning alone? Was he reigning with someone else? Were you using Babylonian number system? Were you using the Hebrew number systems? Were you using, there's all these issues. Look at how the difficulty is with on what day did Jesus resurrect, right? It has to be or what day did he go into the grave? It has to be the Thursday because it's 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth. Why do we celebrate it as Good Friday? Because it was church tradition that somebody just set it up that way. I can't explain it, but I do know the math of it. We also have to remember, are you counting from sundown to sunrise, which is Hebrew reckoning? Or are you using, and when it talks about a Sabbath, is it talking about a high holy Sabbath or the regular Sabbath? There's always complications in things like that. And so this is my opinion on those kinds of things. I wouldn't get wrapped around the complications of it unless you just really want to you personally want to spend hours and hours trying to figure out all the reasonings as to why the number is right. What I know is I believe God's written word. Whatever he says is what's right. And if he said 66 went down, that's how many went down. And if he says 70 in all, with counting Joseph, the 2 grandsons, and Joseph later, that's now 70. That's what it was. In Acts, if they say 75, that's because by then they've added more grandchildren in. But it's still truthful and factual. And I just wouldn't argue with the scriptures on it. How they got to those numbers matters not. There's a reason why we're misunderstanding it if we don't come to the right number ourselves. I've always found that to be true. It's like the Nephilim thing, who are these sons of God that they talk about in there. Well, it's men. I guarantee you it's men because angels don't procreate. In any event, there's always these little tiny complications that people want to get wrapped around, and it's just not worth the struggle, I don't think, for me personally. But there are people who want to know the answer. And what I do is I do praise God for some people who figure it out finally and then tell me, like these guys. In Acts 7, they said, they've added in 5 other grandkids. That's how they get to 75. Oh, well, that explains that. I'm glad somebody figured it out because they don't tell you in the written text. They just say 75, and you're like, wait a minute, it said 66 and 70, and now it's 75. What's going on, right?
The other thing, when I wrote all these people down and did all this, Leah, the young love, had so many more descendants.
Holy moly, wasn't that interesting? That was, yeah. So if you hadn't done it, in 8 to 15 is Leah. She has 33, right? And Zilpah has 16, Rachel has 14, Bilhah has 7. So it is amazing when you look at that from that perspective. And those are just the ones of the male side. On the girl side, there's way more than that even. So it's very cool, very interesting. Okay, let's see. We got to hurry along here. 27. So here's this is the sons of Israel who went down to Egypt. Those are the complicated numberings in there. Now we're going to do, wrong button, 28 to 30. The next segment on this is all about what? It's a very short, I broke it up because of, really there were 2 conversations going on there, right? The first few verses, 28 to 30, is about Joseph and when he meets his father, right? And I wanted that to be a distinctive paragraph because of, I think, the importance of their reunion. And what is said there?
Jacob says, now I've seen you, I can die.
Yeah, I've seen you, now I can die. And they wept, right? Again, you see them weeping. Boy, this man has my girlfriend in England, Shirley Baker, you know who you are, she would say his kidneys are too close to his eyeballs. She used to say that. Okay, this man cries a lot. Did you notice he has to leave the room to cry, he comes back, he has to go bawls for hours on end when he reveals himself to his brothers. Now here he is reuniting. Now I'm not saying anything negative, I'm just making light of it, but he does a lot of crying. So now again, Joseph met his father and they wept. So it's just a happy reunion, which is kind of cool because of the long time between them, and you just kind of feel like this is like that moment in the movie when everybody's like, ah, finally, they're back together again, right? So
Kind of finally hear a little bit of gratitude in Jacob.
yeah. Yeah, for a change. Yeah. Okay, so he's reunited with Joseph. The last time Joseph saw his father, he was 17 years old. And Jacob's pondering in his mind, you remember when he had the dream about it? So Jacob's pondering in his mind about that vision that his young 17-year-old son had. It must have come flooding back to him at some point in all this, right? If not before, certainly at this point, because now they're reunited. Joseph's dream, it really designated him as one that God had chosen to be over his family, right? Because in the dream, they were all bowing to him, correct? So if you had to kind of speak about this reunion, how profound is this reunion in this moment? In particular, if for nobody else, for Joseph and for Jacob, not because of the reunion itself, but because of what? That's right, the fulfillment of prophecy. Here we have, this was more than a family reunion. It was fulfillment of God's prophetic vision that had been given to Joseph more than 20 years prior, where he saw all of the family bowing to him, and then the sun and the moon and the stars as well, remember?
Well, in 47:31 is when, that's Joseph's vow.
Well, no, Israel, you're talking about 31? Israel bowed in worship. Israel is Jacob, the dad. Mm-hmm. Ow. Ooh. Sorry. I'm having a pain. All those wounds on my legs are healing, and every now and then I get a sharp stabbing pain. Owie, owie, owie. It really catches my attention. Like, okay. All right, so Jacob is reunited with Joseph. We see this is fulfilling Joseph's vision. His family bowing. But more than the bowing part of it is that he literally, in that bowing, is conveying that he's going to be a leader over them. He's going to be the one to whom they go to for their support system, for their provision, he's literally becoming the patriarchal leader in the family. Just really bowing as a father to them even. Patriarch. Provider. Oh, something along those lines, however you want to say that. Okay? All right, now the 31 to 34, this is really cool too. 31 to 34 is the last part of this chapter What is Joseph doing here? What does he do? What does it say he's doing here?
Preparing them on how they should present themselves.
There you, that's exactly, he's prepping them to pass a test, isn't he? Why is this? Tell me what's going on here. Maybe, to a degree. To a degree. Certainly, what he's saying, you know, have they actually met Pharaoh yet, and have these questions been posed yet? No. So it is a prep, right? He is preparing them to meet Pharaoh. The expectation on Joseph's part is Pharaoh's going to ask you, what do you guys do for a living? What's your occupation, correct? Why would Pharaoh do that? Besides it just being courtesy. We in America go, oh, that's just courtesy. Hey, what do you do for a living, right? But you remember, Pharaoh is the leader of a nation. And he's the leader of a nation in a time in history when all the nations are taxed. There's great stress upon them, and all the world, so to speak, is coming to Pharaoh for help, right? Talk about immigration problems, right? Open borders, right? So what is it that, give me some thoughts on what you think.
To benefit us.
There you go. Is that okay to do for a leader of a nation to say to people who want to come and be a part of his land and his umbrella?
Apply for a visa when my husband applied to come to the U.S. from Canada. He had to assure the government that he wouldn't take jobs that away from Americans.
There you go. See, what happened? How did we waywardly stray so far? This is interesting. Every leader, I'm going to read just what I came up with in my head last night. Every leader of a nation has a moral duty to ensure those requesting citizenship or temporary shelter in their land to be those who will contribute and not be a burden on his own people. Every leader has a moral obligation to do this. Right now, we are not seeing that happen in our nation. I'm not trying to be political. I'm just showing you a pragmatic insight that Scripture is giving us about this issue. Joseph is preparing his brothers, telling them what? When you see him, tell them what?
Keepers of livestock.
That's right. You guys actually have a profession. And it's a profession, by the way, none of the people of Egypt are going to want. They loathe shepherds. They think you guys are the lowliest of the earth. So you're not going to be vying for the work that they do. You're going to actually be contributing in a way by providing quality workmanship in a field of service that no one else wants. Correct? And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, right? We talk about people that want to come to America, and we talk about them doing the jobs that nobody else wants. Well, in a way, that was true at one time, but right now we've gone way beyond that, right? We don't have anyone checking to say, are you going to be self-sufficient or are you going to be a burden upon us? What kind of jobs are you bringing? What qualities do you offer to us as a nation that we would want you to be here? Do you see what Pharaoh is actually doing here? Joseph is setting them up to speak to Pharaoh on a level that's pragmatic, that not only takes the fact that he had been generous to them, say, yes, tell them to come. Because I feel like I owe this to Joseph. Joseph did this great thing for us as a nation. I want to bless his family. But by the way, when that family shows up, all 66 of them, right, plus the others, are they going to be contributing factor to our nation? Or are they going to be a drag on us? Are they going to tax an already taxed system? And that's what's going on here. Isn't that interesting that you see that here? So I just put on here, does this not hit a nerve for our time? And would it not be wisdom as policy to enforce this? To check who's coming over your border and find out if they are going to be good contributing citizens. Okay, off that one. So we don't get ourselves in hot water with someone. Okay, Genesis 46, then title. What did God do? God sent Jacob to where? Egypt. And who else went with him? Because we got, how much of this chapter is about all these other people? Like a whole bunch. All his descendants went with him. So God sent Jacob to Egypt with all his descendants. All the children of Israel. So you can put a nice big Star of David on that. Right? David who doesn't exist yet. Okay, now 47. We've got about 15 minutes. We're doing well. I'm happy.
Real quickly, it looks like Goshen is about 70 miles north of Cairo. And I'm just assuming that Pharaoh lives somewhere near
Probably. It's hard to say, but yeah. It probably, wherever his God center was for that particular Pharaoh, and each Pharaoh had their own special favorite something. Yeah. Okay. Now, one more to go. Let's go over here. Let's do Genesis 47. We got to start with 1 to 8. Oh, no, 1 to 6. Sorry. I looked in the wrong. Oh, there's Michael. He's returned. We're happy to see you back. We missed you. I only needed you 3 or 4 times, but other than that, it's been fine. I'm only kidding. Good for you. You're double task. You are doing what your wife does every morning, double tasking on everything, right? Awesome. Thank you so much. We are very blessed. Okay, what's going on in 1 to 6 of 47? I love this part of the story. This is good.
They're meeting Pharaoh.
They're going to meet Pharaoh, and when Joseph goes into Pharaoh to let Pharaoh know that his family is approaching, that they have arrived, correct? Why do you think he does this? Yeah. Protocol, probably. The system that's always in place. It's just like a dignitary who gets announced. Do you remember in the New Testament, it always talks about the forerunner, John the Baptist being a forerunner of Christ, and because Christ was the king, and all kings have forerunners who go before them to announce their coming. So it's kind of along those lines, I would guess, right? And he says, when he first went, though, he took 5 of his brothers as basically a warm-up, right? I don't know. Probably one started with a B. Yeah. So he goes and he takes his brothers. Pharaoh says to his brothers, what? Oh, what is your occupation? Gee, did you think they got fed the questions ahead of time? Kind of like some of our elections, feeding them ahead of time. This is the questions you'll be asked. Be ready. Well, he prepared them well. And their response? We're shepherds, and that's right. And now, therefore, please let your servants live in the land of Goshen. Because why Goshen? Why do you think they picked Goshen?
That's where that delta is.
That's where all those waterways are. That's where all the water and the grass for grazing and so forth. So we've got this one well figured out now at this point, right? If you haven't drawn yourself a little map with all those waterways, as a reminder, I would recommend you do that, just because it will be helpful to you when you go back to look at your observation worksheets, that the reason they wanted Goshen to begin with and why that was then offered. And he considered it the best of the land, by the way, right? Because I'm sure of all the water that was there. Now, therefore, let us live in the land of Goshen. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is what? At your disposal. Isn't that an amazing? I looked that word up. Did anybody else look up that word disposal? We're in 47. I got to find my 47. Let me see if I got anything. I don't remember. Except I did write it down on my notes. Disposal. No, it does. It just says before the face of. So what do you think it means? It's at your disposal. It's all yours. Whatever you want, it's yours, right? Because of his gratitude for what Joseph had done for him. So the land of Egypt is at your disposal. Settle your father, your brothers in the best of the land. Let them live in the land of Goshen. And if you know any capable men, oh, this is a good one. If you know any capable men, then put them in charge of my livestock. Now, what's going on there?
These are all shepherds,
Yeah?
because that's what he said, but there must be some better ones at it than others.
Yeah.
I want those for my livestock.
Yes. I love this. So again, it's another qualifying thing that's going on here. First of all, when you come into the land, will you contribute, or are you going to be a burden on the system? No, they're not going to be a burden. They are shepherds. Nobody else wants that job. Great. Okay. Hey, by the way, among those shepherds, are there any that are really capable? And if they're capable, I want them. I want them for me, right? Which is really cool. So I looked up that word capable. Let's put this up here as a title. First of all, Pharaoh, this is important. It says he gives Jacob the best of the land. Anything he wants. Is that your? And then it says he offers capable men work, basically. You're going to come work for Pharaoh. How do you spell? Sorry, I lost my brain. Okay, so we want to look at that word capable, because I just thought this was an interesting part of the storyline, also kind of like some of this other things. Okay, it's number 2428. Did anybody look it up? Oh, good. Tell me what you got. Very good. Strong, valiant, worthy. That's a really good one. Strong, valiant, worthy. Valor. I love that word, valor, or noble character, right? Valor, noble. And then it went on to say in my other dictionaries, qualified for a task, attributed as making them elite. In other words, they were the cream of the crop. These are men who are excellent, skilled men, in other words. So this gives me a couple of verses. I think we have time. Let's go to Proverbs 22:29, and I'm just going to give you a list of other ones after we read that one out loud, because I think this is really interesting. What God says about men who are skilled in this manner, the fact that he wanted them to be capable. Capable just doesn't mean, oh, they can do the job. They can sit in the chair and make phone calls, or they can go out and pick up garbage off the streets. I mean, it's not just a job anybody can do. These are capable men. They're a lot like their dad, Jacob, who went and did all the breeding and all the careful, work with his sheep and flocks when he was up in Padam Haran. All right. Do you have that one handy? Oh,
29 what?
22:29.
I have it.
Okay,
If
good.
you see a man skillful in his work, he will stand before kings. He will not stand before obscure men.
Isn't that awesome? So if you are skilled, you will stand before kings. That's awesome, Mike. You ready to go stand before kings? Skilled men. I love it. Okay, so, and not before the obscure, though. They won't be, because they're not second rate, they're actually first rate men. So the king was saying, among those men who are going to be doing the menial job of shepherding, which no one in my kingdom wants anyway, among them, give me the skilled of the skilled. I want the finest of your workmen in that area, and they will work for me. So he's offering them work, not just for anybody, but work for the king. Why is that significant for Israel? To work, skilled men to work for Pharaoh. What have we said? Hold on a second here. Am I in this? Yeah, we're getting close.
I'm sorry, I missed what you asked.
Why is it significant that Pharaoh offered them this work? That some of their men, the skilled ones, he wanted them to come and work for Pharaoh. What's going on nationally? What's going on in the world? Who's got jobs to pay anybody anything? Nobody. There's in times that, you know what, one of the things that kind of hit me was, one of the things we looked at when we did our Revelation study was what's going to be going on in our world, when the church is raptured and everyone is left to have to endure those 7 years. And some of the very early seals that are broken, you're going to have war and famine and what was the other one? There was another one. Earthquakes, right? There's going to be all these really horrible things, very much like this, but much worse, obviously. And when that occurs, who's going to be hiring anybody? Who's going to be looking out for you and your family when I'm just trying to hang on by a thread myself? Nobody. So the fact that there was work made available for Israel, the nation of Israel, in the field of their expertise, this kind of goes to that list I gave you at the beginning, that there was employment in a time of economic peril.
And for Egyptians, if no one wanted that job, they definitely didn't do a very good job at it.
Right, exactly.
Now Pharaoh has the best, on the best land for his life.
That's right. And remember how Jacob did that. He got all these, of course, God was in it. We know that too, because it had to do with getting him out of there and back to Canaan. But Jacob exactly knew what to put in the water, what kind of remember we talked about he cut the reeds and he made stripes in them and laid the reeds down into the water. And after we did some research on that, what we found out was those were nutrients that caused good breeding, because it gave them health, it gave them vigor, gave them all the right nutrients so that they could conceive and have healthy babies that would be born. And so these are the men who have been taught by the best of the best, Jacob, whom God divinely inspired to have all that knowledge. And also history, obviously, they had a lot of years of people training them. But these are the ones who are now going to be working for Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is the only one in that time, in that moment in history, that had a job to offer, that could pay them anything. Right? No. There would be no resentment among the people there. They would be very happy. Yeah. I'm wondering if that kind of goes back to earlier, that they were also happy about them coming. It could be that they even had some of that information. Okay. So we have Pharaoh gives Jacob the best land, and he offers capable men work for Pharaoh. They're going to have financial income because of this scenario here. Oh, let me just tell you, there's another one that says in Colossians 3:2, and whatsoever you do, do it heartily as unto the Lord, right? There's that. But I'm going to give you a few verses you can go and look up later concerning this idea of skilled men and why we want to excel in the work that we all do as Christians. Exodus 18:21. You might need to read before and after, but this gets you in the target zone. 1 Timothy 4:12. Proverbs 16:3, Proverbs 31:31. I think that's that's right, the proverb woman, right? 1 Corinthians 14:40. Somebody read that 14:40. If I remember right, that one was especially good. I can't remember now why I'm thinking that. I did look all these up, but I can't remember them all completely. 14:40 of 1 Corinthians.
But all things must be done properly and in an orderly manner.
I love that. It's kind of like, neat and clean and tidy and orderly. And I love orderliness when God speaks of that. So often, everything we see in the Word of God, there's this orderliness to it, and it's logical. right? So people who want to take like Revelation and make it disorderly and unlogical, to me is like, it doesn't even fit the character of God. So why would you do that, right? Just take it at its face value, put it in logical order and in a sequential order of timeline, which is how we live life, right? And then it makes sense. Okay, let's go to 7 to 12. I love this one. And actually, we're going to end up with just three titles, because one of them I'm going to really condense it for you. What do you see here in 7 to 12? What does Jacob do? That's most significant. He blesses Pharaoh. Jacob blesses, and he does him. I love this. Jacob blesses Pharaoh coming and going. Did you notice that? He blesses him as he greets him, and he blesses him again as he's about to leave. He blesses Pharaoh. Now, this is important to me because when Pharaoh gives Jacob a blessing up here through giving him the best of the land, what did God say back in Genesis 3? Genesis 12:3. Sorry. Do you remember back in Genesis 12 when the first of the promises, he called Abram out of the land of the Chaldeans? He said, I'm going to give you land, seed, nation. And he said and he went on to say, and I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. What has Pharaoh just done to Jacob here? Pharaoh blessed him, right? He blessed Israel right here. He may not have known it. He thought he was just saying thank you to his son. But in reality, when we look at that list of provisions that God makes, you're seeing that what Pharaoh really did was he was a blessing to Israel. And because he was a blessing, then when Jacob comes in and greets him, and Jacob is realizing the blessing of this, first of all, Jacob realizes God sent him. God gave him a vision and said, go, I'm sending you. Don't be afraid. While you're there, I'm going to increase you. I'm going to multiply your nation. So he already knows what God has said about this. He now comes in, he meets Pharaoh, and he blesses Pharaoh because Pharaoh has already blessed him. So I think this is cool. So I will bless those who bless you. So Jacob is saying in response, you blessed me, God is going to bless you, Pharaoh. So he's doing it with full authority, right? Of a truth statement about what he knows concerning how God operates. I will bless those who bless you. So he does that. Now, in response, in the next part of it is, now we can go on. Joseph provided for all his father's household. Joseph had been chosen for the salvation of his people. All kind of those points are underneath 7 to 12. But now we're going to go to 13 to 26. And what actually happens to Pharaoh?
Can I go back a minute?
Uh-huh.
When I looked up bless on that verse.
Yes. Yes.
It was to kneel.
Yes. It could be to kneel, but it also has other things in. Let's see if I've got it here. It means blessing. It means bless another. In the Dictionary of Biblical Languages, it says to commend, speak words invoking divine favor with the intent that the object will have favorable circumstances or state at a future time. So in other words, he literally is saying, I will bless. Do you guys remember me talking about the 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐭 blessing? We used to sing when people were in our Bible study group were ready to move on to another place. We would all stand in a circle and extend our hands. This was taught to us by one of the couples in the group, and we would sing, may the blessings of the Lord be upon you. I bless you in the name of the Lord. You hear the tune? May the blessings of the Lord be upon you. I bless you in the name of the Lord. So that was our 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐭 blessing, which I never forgot because it was funny And it was so sweet. In the moment, I mean, I literally was crying because this couple was about to leave, and I had never heard this, but they were a blessing to me anyway. So this is what he's doing. He's blessing him in the name of the Lord. And because Pharaoh has blessed him, and Jacob knows this about God and what God has said, I will bless those who bless you, Jacob. And this has been told to Abraham. It was passed on to Isaac. It was passed on to Jacob. I guarantee you they all knew this statement. So that's what's being stated here. So when Jacob blesses Pharaoh, what happens in 13 to 26? Pharaoh is blessed. Talk about blessing. And this has to do with the work of Joseph. Again, his very fine qualities as an administrator, as a lord, as a master, an overseer, right? As a counselor to Pharaoh. He gives him all kinds of great insights as to what he should be doing. So the first thing he does, if you just look at 13 to 19, what happens there?
People are bringing their livestock.
Yeah. So we see Joseph gathers, well, actually before the livestock, the first part of it has to do with what? Their money. He gathers money into Pharaoh's house. I'm going to mess that up eventually. That Pharaoh's hard to keep writing. Okay, so that's in 13 to 19. Now you go to 20, and then we get to the next part. 20 to 23. Now what does Joseph do? Yep, Joseph buys up all their livestock. Let's see, Joseph bought all the land of Egypt and the livestock, right? Joseph bought all, let's see, I'll just put land, all the rest in there too. But the land is really important, right? For Pharaoh. So who's getting blessed here? Pharaoh. Pharaoh is being blessed. Joseph gathers into Pharaoh's house money. Joseph bought all the land for Pharaoh's own possession. He's going to possess it all. Then in 24 to 26, this part is kind of the weird one that I had to think on for a while. But at the harvest you shall give a fifth to Pharaoh. 4/5 shall be for your own seed of the field, and for your food, and for those of your household as food for your little ones. Okay, I've got to give a 20% income tax to Pharaoh, right? For the money. For the land that I just gave you, that was my land. Now I don't have my land. Now I'm going to give you a tax on that land. And what do the people say in response in 25? Whew, you saved our lives. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
And this is future, because the harvest isn't going to come for
Yeah, no, it's in the future. Yes, and it's only if they are faithful to go out and plant and plow and take care of that land. So they've just been sold into what? Slavery. So now, by definition, what does this tell us about taxes? What does it do to us as citizens? It enslaves us to our government. Wow, that blew my mind when I read this. I had never known that was in here. I mean, I guess I always knew that as a truth because that's how I've always felt about it. I just didn't know it was in the Bible. And I'm going, holy moly, look at this. So Joseph made it a statute concerning the land of Egypt. It's valid to this day. So in the days now remember, the writing of Genesis has two historical contexts, right? First of all, it's the beginnings. So it tells us the stories of all the beginnings and all the patriarchs and all these people. But who wrote it? Moses. So we're talking hundreds of years yet in the future. Moses is writing this, and he's saying about that income tax that Joseph established for Pharaoh to have a permanent income for himself, plus all the people for the rest of their lives are going to be in servitude to their government with a 20% tax, which, by the way, we pay more than that. We pay probably close to 30% in Texas, right? Because we've also got property taxes and that kind of stuff. So it's valid to this day that Pharaoh should have the fifth. Only the land of the priests did not become Pharaoh's. So they didn't. And who else's land did not become Pharaoh's? Goshen. Which, by the way, when he accepted that, how did he describe himself? We didn't talk about that. When Jacob said, he says, how old are you? And he says, I'm 130. I've had a terrible life. I'm 130, very young for my age. Everyone else before me has been here a lot longer than I. But he said about his life, how did he describe it in verse 9? The years of my what? Sojourning. Do you guys know what sojourning means?
Yeah.
Traveling, temporary, as an alien, not as a permanent resident. So what is he impressing upon Pharaoh when he goes on? I'm just passing through. I'm not planning to take up permanent residence. So when he moved in there and Pharaoh literally gave him the land of Goshen, and he did. It's all yours. It's at your disposal. Now, it doesn't mean he possessed it necessarily, but he gave it to him for full use while he was there. But he ensured Pharaoh he was there temporarily. This was not going to be a permanent residence for them. And he had already also implied that his whole life had been that way. Where else had he done sojourning that wasn't his own yet? In Canaan. He had lived in Canaan as a sojourner. And he expresses that to different kings he meets when he's there on the land. So that I thought was interesting, is the idea that Joseph now has bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh's possession. There are only two things that are not his. Israel is not his, the people. All the people belong to Pharaoh now, but not Israel. They're there as sojourners, and they've been given land to live on. But it is a temporary thing, all 400 years of it. Then Joseph establishes this yearly income tax. And that does what? Making the people what? Making the people slaves to Pharaoh. Now, our idea of being a slave means you're locked up and in chains and you can't go anywhere, but that's not what this is talking about. It's talking about you're a slave to the leader of your nation now, because you owe him every year a 20% income tax. Very interesting, right? But so how is Pharaoh blessed? By the wealth, the land, and an established income that he will have from then forward. That's amazing. That's a lot of blessing. And the people, how do they feel about it? They're thankful. They have no idea. They're clueless yet. In time, they'll figure out that this is not a good thing. But the people are thankful. I'm just going to put that on here. The people are thankful. So how skilled do you think Jacob was in all of his dealings then in this? If in the end Pharaoh gets filthy rich and gets all the land and all the people and a yearly income, and the people are happy about it, that is some pretty mighty fine dancing he did there, huh? Okay, and in 27 to 31, which concludes this for us, what happens to Israel? Yes, he will die, but what happens to the nation of Israel? Yeah.
They become fruitful
Uh-huh.
and numerous.
Yep. So they prosper in Egypt. And then Jacob he asks what? What does he ask his son to do? And he asks him to swear on it.
Don't bury me here.
Yeah. He asked to be buried in Canaan. We're not quite at his death, but he's preparing for his death. And he's asking him, he said to him, Jacob asks, to be buried in Canaan. He says, carry me out of Egypt, bury me in the burial place of my ancestors in Canaan, which is with Abraham and Isaac. I gave a reference of 47:30. That's where he says that. And then Jacob bowed in worship at the head of the bed. And that concludes the bowing of the stars before, in the presence of Jacob. And of course, he's worshiping God, but bowing nonetheless. All right.